The first light of day spilled over the Strait of Hormuz like molten silver, reflecting off the narrow ribbon of water that threaded between barren rock and desert. From orbit, it seemed like any other stretch of sea, a tranquil, almost indifferent corridor. But for those aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln and its strike group, the strait was never innocent. Each wave, each shimmer of light on the deck, carried significance. Thousands of sailors moved with a precision born of routine, but their minds were alive with every possibility the sea could present. Helicopters perched silently, their rotors folded like tense muscles, waiting. Fighter jets lined the flight deck like arguments stacked and ready to launch into the air. Every plane a compact embodiment of raw power and calculated strategy. The destroyers cut the water with practiced exactness, forward and aft, while the cruiser offset slightly, stretching the radar horizon, extending sight beyond the naked eye. Even the tankers sliding through the lane seemed to respect an unspoken choreography. One file, one course, a rhythm that concealed an undercurrent of tension no casual observer could detect. The air smelled of salt, oil, and fuel, but beneath it was the invisible weight of history and anticipation. The Strait had been a stage for power for decades, a place where global economies and national egos intertwined. Iran's forces were awake on the northern shores, sensors flickering silently, vehicles moving with calculated stealth, encrypted chatter rolling across the ether like a heartbeat. They were not yet visible, but they were present, a shadow just beyond sight. Every single member of the strike group understood the rules of this narrow, strategic theater. In these waters, one misstep could be fatal. Unlike the open ocean, the strait allowed no freedom of maneuver, no room for error. Here, geography itself was a weapon. Below the decks, the Combat Information Center hummed like a living machine. Operators scanned hundreds of feeds, cross-referencing radar, thermal imaging, and signals intelligence, translating every flicker of activity into actionable knowledge. Some signals were obvious, others subtle. A faint spike in coastal communications, an unusual cadence in encrypted chatter, a repeated phrase buried inside routine transmission. Most would pass unnoticed, but here, every anomaly mattered. The strike group was not just moving through water, it was moving through a space defined by potential threats, a corridor where perception mattered as much as steel. The tension was silent but palpable. Crew members moved with quiet choreography, yellow shirts signaling, ropes secured, weapon systems checked, every action deliberate, every step rehearsed. To anyone watching from above, the carrier seemed calm, almost indifferent. But beneath the surface, in the narrow channels of the strait, calm was a mask. Every turn, every mile, was a calculation. Every signal could herald an engagement. The horizon remained empty for now, yet the shadow of what might come pressed on every sensor, every eye, every decision. History lingered here too. The Strait of Hormuz had always been a choke point, a place where the global flow of oil and power converged. Nearly a fifth of the world's oil moved through this corridor, yet it was not the steel or engines that mattered most. It was perception. A credible threat here could ripple across markets, capitals, and minds. Iran's doctrine recognized this. Their aim was asymmetric, subtle, and psychological. Missiles instead of carriers, drones instead of aircraft, mines instead of fleets. Disruption, not victory, defined their strategy. By 6:20, the strike group's formation became more apparent. The carrier, massive and immovable, sat at the center like a moving city, surrounded by escorts that extended the senses of the entire formation. Each ship, each crew, each radar pulse was a note in a complex symphony of deterrence. Alone, each was dangerous. Together, they were a singular, integrated weapon. Every mile, every maneuver, every heartbeat aboard contributed to a system that could absorb chaos and still maintain its rhythm. Even the skies above were part of the calculus. Helicopters and fighters remained poised, waiting to respond but constrained by the geometry of the strait. Their launch could not be rushed. Timing was critical. One false move, one premature release, and the consequences could extend far beyond the immediate physical threat. Here, patience was as lethal as firepower. In the far distance, coastal sensors quietly scanned, mobile launchers hummed with dormant energy, and encrypted communications whispered of coordination. Iran was awake. They were studying, calculating, waiting for the precise moment to test the strike group's discipline. The tension was invisible but omnipresent, a layer over calm waters. Each sailor, each operator, was part of a living organism, sensing and responding to signals no one outside could perceive. By 6:40, the carrier's bridge remained serene in appearance, yet inside, the officers understood every nuance of risk. The Strait of Hormuz was more than geography. It was a test of doctrine, nerve, and precision. Each crew member's action, each command given, was a link in a chain designed to survive uncertainty and assert control. The world might see calm water and steady ships, but beneath, a storm of potential was always in motion. As the first beams of sunlight broke fully over the horizon, the carrier and its escorts moved steadily through the strait, a symbol of calculated dominance. The scene was cinematic, the metallic decks gleaming, the water reflecting light like shattered glass, and the sailors moving with disciplined grace, unaware of the full scope of eyes observing them from miles away. In these first 12 minutes, the stage was set, the players in position, and the strait itself had begun to speak in the language of tension and impending confrontation. For decades, Tehran had studied the waters of Hormuz, not just as a channel of trade, but as a stage for power. The Iranian military doctrine here was not built on brute force or overwhelming fleets. It was built on asymmetric advantage, on the art of making a small force feel like a storm. They understood that against a U.S. carrier strike group, conventional naval engagement was a fantasy. There was no fleet-to-fleet showdown to be won. Instead, every missile, drone, mine, and fast boat was a note in a carefully composed symphony of disruption, a layered puzzle designed to force the enemy into a labyrinth of reaction and uncertainty. From command bunkers perched on the northern coastline, officers monitored the early morning movements of the strike group, studying every signal, every radar reflection, every small deviation from routine. Each piece of data was part of a living intelligence picture, a digital map of American doctrine and procedure. Iran knew that a carrier's true strength lay not in its steel, engines, or weaponry alone. It lay in the perception of invulnerability. To shake that perception was to achieve a psychological victory long before any physical engagement. Missiles fired at a carrier weren't just projectiles. They were statements, challenges, threats made tangible. The architecture of Iranian deterrence was subtle. Fast boats patrolled like bees, darting along the coastline, sometimes appearing and disappearing so quickly they were almost imagined. Mines rested in the water, invisible but lethal, silently anchoring fear into the movement of every tanker and naval vessel. Drones hummed high and low, weaving patterns designed to trigger radar operators, to saturate sensors, to force the American crews to question what was real and what was illusion. Each layer of threat was calibrated for psychological pressure. The goal wasn't destruction alone. It was hesitation, the smallest crack in confidence that could be exploited and amplified. Inside Tehran's war rooms, analysts ran simulations over and over. Every potential U.S. maneuver was modeled, every response considered. The logic was elegant. A single carrier is nearly untouchable in open ocean, but in the strait, space itself becomes the enemy. Narrow waters compress time, speed up reaction cycles, and amplify every error. Iran's doctrine didn't need to sink a ship. It only needed to create the impression of danger, to force a decision, to draw a response that could be analyzed, cataloged, and turned into future advantage. The mathematics of the operation fascinated their strategists. Drones flying in staggered waves, missiles launched from multiple coastal points, fast boats weaving through shipping lanes. All of it was calculated to saturate sensors, multiply decisions, and compress reaction times. Each strike was like a chess move in 3 dimensions. Every potential intercept, every distraction, every false signal was part of a calculated rhythm. The Americans were not expected to fail. They were expected to react, and in reacting, reveal themselves. Psychological warfare was not theory. It was measured, tested, rehearsed. Iranian commanders knew that the mere possibility of a hit on a carrier would ripple far beyond the strait. Oil markets would shudder, insurance rates would spike, regional capitals would whisper and speculate. This was leverage without destruction. influence without confrontation, power drawn from fear and anticipation. Every simulation drilled this point home. In the theater of Hormuz, perception was the ultimate weapon. Technology and human intuition merged in their planning. Signals intelligence, encrypted communications, radar feeds, and mobile launch signatures were all cross-referenced, mapped, and layered. But human judgment remained critical. Officers had to anticipate American doctrine, to predict where the carriers might project power, to understand if strike here or a drone swarm there wasn't just physics, it was a message. In Tehran, months of preparation culminated not in a single attack, but in a psychological crescendo, a moment where confidence and hesitation would collide. And yet, this doctrine was fragile. It relied on assumptions that the Americans would respond in predictable ways, that the first wave of threats would provoke calculation before counteraction, that the presence of multiple tracks would create hesitation rather than immediate neutralization. Any misstep, any miscalculation in timing or geometry could reduce the carefully choreographed plan to noise. Still, the architects of the operation believed in their system. They had rehearsed each scenario, played out every possibility, and embedded uncertainty at every layer. As the U.S. strike group moved deeper into the strait, Iran's planners watched every pulse on the radar, every flicker of activity in the air and on water. Each operator on the northern shore felt the same tension that sailors aboard the carrier felt, but for opposite reasons. For the Americans, it was the discipline of vigilance. For Iran, it was the anticipation of impact. Minutes stretched like hours as each side measured, calculated, and waited. Every movement had consequence. Every silence carried weight. Every signal was a potential trigger. By now, the morning sun had climbed higher, and the water reflected it with dazzling clarity. Yet beneath the glittering surface, unseen forces had begun to position themselves. Missiles lay in wait, drones drifted in silent arcs, fast boats crouched near islands like predators in hiding. The stage was set, the players in place, and the doctrine of disruption began to hum quietly like a drumbeat in the minds of those watching. For Iran, the attack wasn't about winning in the traditional sense. It was about testing, probing, and exposing a force built to withstand even the most complex threats. And in doing so, they hoped to observe a single moment, hesitation. That moment, they believed, could shift the balance long before a missile ever flew. By mid-morning, the strike group had settled into the rhythm of the strait, moving like a single organism, each ship a limb, each radar pulse a nerve ending. From the flight deck, the scene appeared calm, almost routine. Yellow shirt crew members signaled and moved with effortless precision. Jets rested in their assigned spaces, and the endless waves reflected a light that seemed deceptively peaceful. Yet, deep below in the Combat Information Center, every operator knew that calm was a thin veneer over an ocean of potential danger. Every screen flickered with possibilities. Every sensor feed held the weight of unseen threats. For months, the strike group had trained for this moment, yet training could never fully replicate the anxiety of a real, confined corridor where mistakes could cascade into catastrophe. At precisely 7:11, the first anomaly appeared. Signals intelligence picked up subtle changes along the northern coastline, patterns in encrypted traffic that weren't loud, weren't aggressive, but were distinctly off rhythm. The cadence of communication shifted, almost imperceptibly, as if the land itself had taken a breath and held it. Routine chatter, now threaded with repetitive phrases, suggested synchronization across multiple units, a classic precursor to coordinated action. The operators leaned in, scanning, comparing, analyzing. Each repeated phrase, each anomaly in signal timing, was a small, deliberate clue. Something was being prepared. Here, in these quiet minutes, anticipation was as sharp as any weapon. The geography of the strait amplified every risk. Narrow lanes, islands, and shallow channels left no room for error. Ships could not maneuver freely. Every deviation could expose a vulnerability. The American doctrine relied on precision, on layered defense, on the integrated intelligence network that made the formation more than the sum of its parts. But even the best systems depended on time. Time to detect, time to classify, time to react. Iran's planners understood this calculus perfectly. Saturation, distraction, and coordination would be their tools to compress that time and create pressure. By 7:38, one of the destroyers increased its radar sweep rate. The sensors became sharper, tracking more updates per second, building an evolving mosaic of potential threats. Cruisers brought additional sensors online, extending the horizon, layering air and surface pictures, ensuring no single point of failure could blind the group. Across the network, every ship fed data into a collective mind, turning isolated holes into an integrated vision. For the Americans, these measures were routine. For the Iranians, each adjustment was a challenge, a test of discipline and response time, a small victory or failure written in seconds and meters. At 7:52, the first suspicious surface contacts emerged, weaving through inlets north of Keshem Island. Too fast to be commercial, too small to be conventional, their movement suggested intent rather than accident. Minutes later, low-altitude returns appeared above the coast. Targets too inconsistent to classify cleanly, too deliberate to ignore. This was the beginning of a classic saturation problem, a single, subtle wave that forced operators to make critical decisions, to prioritize, to choose which threats mattered most and which were distractions. It was an early test of the strike group's integrated systems, designed to see if American doctrine could withstand ambiguity. By 8:06, a civilian tanker reported flashes along the northern shoreline. Though unverified, the intelligence mattered. Even casual observation, even noise, could hint at a larger pattern. The operators absorbed this into their evolving picture. By 8:12, overhead surveillance confirmed multiple mobile launch signatures, thermal traces moving into pre-surveyed positions. The patterns were deliberate, clean, and designed to be read by those trained to detect them. Iran's preparation had been meticulous, designed to reveal just enough to create pressure while keeping the real strike concealed. A sudden alert arrived at 8:16, an intercepted line, calm, procedural, repeated twice, almost invisible to the untrained ear. Window opens in 30. The most dangerous words in warfare are often not shouted. They arrive quietly, like a whispered countdown in a room full of tension. Below decks, the strike group shifted, not into panic, but into lethal readiness. Defensive systems were brought online, engagement zones calibrated, helicopter teams moved into standoff positions, and sensors locked on. The formation didn't alter course. Doing so would reveal reaction, expose fear, and provide intelligence to the observer. In Hormuz, doctrine was as deadly as any missile. By 8:24, the strait felt smaller, tighter, like a constricting band of water forcing every ship to follow invisible rails. The northern coast had become a chessboard, each pixel of radar data a potential threat, each flicker of light on the sea a signal. Within the Combat Information Center, operators spoke only in short calls and confirmations, language compressed to fit the narrow bandwidth of time. Every second mattered. Hesitation could be fatal. The strike group became a living organism, reacting as one, calculating, measuring, and preparing for the moment when theory would collide with reality. The sun climbed higher, yet the tension remained dense. Iran's forces, from command bunkers to mobile launch points, had positioned every piece in anticipation of a strike, relying on the assumption that the Americans would reveal themselves, react, and in doing so, provide a map of strengths and weaknesses. The strike group, however, had anticipated the anticipation. The Americans would not rush. They would not flinch. They would absorb, measure, and respond with precision, ensuring that each move was deliberate, each reaction intentional, and each exposure calculated. The quiet minutes stretched, weighted with history, strategy, and the inevitability of conflict. By 8:46, the final confirmation arrived. The attack window was imminent. The procedural calm of the earlier hours gave way to focused readiness. Missiles might soon fly, drones might appear, and fast boats could attempt to disrupt formation. Yet every sailor, every operator, every sensor system was prepared, integrated into a chain of anticipation and counteraction. The first layer of potential threat had been revealed, and the strike group's response had already begun, not with fire, but with the discipline, almost invisible dance of readiness. The stage was set. The moment of truth was approaching. and the strait itself held its breath. At exactly 9 o'clock, the first wave arrived. From the northern coastline, missiles and drones launched with precision, their movement almost imperceptible to the naked eye. The sky above the strait looked calm, but the sensors told a different story. What had been subtle signals and quiet anomalies seconds earlier became a symphony of motion, a deliberate storm. Dozens of hostile tracks appeared simultaneously, some hugging the water like shadows, others climbing in staggered arcs. The goal was clear: saturate the defense, create uncertainty, and force human and machine alike to choose which threat to engage first. Inside the Combat Information Center, the alert tone sounded, not like panic, but like a switch being flipped. Operators' eyes scanned every feed, every radar blip, every thermal trace. The integrated network instantly began classifying threats, prioritizing targets based on speed, altitude, and trajectory. Engagement zones activated automatically. Commands flowed through the data link, bypassing hesitation. This was the product of years of training, rehearsal, and preparation. A system designed not just to defend, but to anticipate, to move as one, a digital organism reacting in real time to chaos. At 9:02, the first interceptors launched. Long-range missiles punched upward and forward with brutal speed, closing the gap between defense and threat in seconds. One by one, Iranian missiles and drones were destroyed mid-air in brilliant flashes, each detonation a tiny star in the morning sky, invisible to the crew on deck, but meticulously logged on every screen below. The waves were designed for saturation, to overwhelm, but the layered defenses absorbed the storm. Different interceptors engaged at different distances, ensuring redundancy, because in this game, redundancy was survival. Meanwhile, fast boats and surface targets attempted to complicate the picture. Some hugged the islands, others drifted near civilian traffic, hoping that caution would delay the American response. The integrated combat system accounted for each potential hazard. Weapons remained silent until engagement zones allowed. Helicopters held standoff positions, and radar continuously scanned, refined, and recalculated every incoming trajectory. Each decision was a fraction of a second, a balance of geometry, timing, and probability. Here, mistakes could be fatal, but discipline proved more powerful than aggression. By 9:06, the second wave entered, a mix of missiles and decoys, designed to confuse, mislead, and force miscalculations. Yet each layer of defense was ready. Short-range missiles fired from escorts, 6-barrel cannons unleashed walls of tungsten, each round calculated to erase threats with precision. The sound of the cannons wasn't like anything cinematic. It was mechanical, continuous, relentless, like tearing cloth. Threats were destroyed not for spectacle but for survival, track by track, calculation by calculation. The strike group's doctrine was proving itself in real time, and the Iranians began to see that their most confident plan was unraveling. At 9:14, the engagement intensified. Low-altitude sea-skimming missiles hugged the waves, attempting to exploit radar blind spots. They moved at speeds that compressed reaction time to mere seconds, testing the limits of human operators and automated systems alike. But the strike group's layered defense held. Each incoming target was met with multiple interceptors. Decoys were identified, neutralized, or ignored. The system's integration, honed through years of training and prior exercises, had transformed a potential disaster into a controlled engagement. Every flash of destruction was logged, every launch point observed. By 9:20, the last wave had arrived. Iran's saturation tactics reached their peak. The combination of missiles, drones, and fast boats had been timed to strike simultaneously, to overwhelm decision-making, and to force hesitation. Yet the strike group remained disciplined, its posture unbroken. Operators moved with precision, data flowing seamlessly from ship to ship. Nothing was left to chance. The integrated sensors, weapons, and communication networks functioned as one organism, absorbing the assault, neutralizing threats, and maintaining formation. And then, in less than 3 minutes, it was over. The air cleared, threats were annihilated, and the sea returned to its usual rhythm. No fires, no casualties, no damage to the carrier or its escorts. The engagement had lasted just minutes, But the implications extended far beyond the strait. What had been intended as a demonstration of Iranian power had instead become a treasure trove of intelligence for the United States. Every launch, every communication, every signature revealed the architecture of the attack, locations, patterns, frequencies, and tactics. Iran's doctrine had been exposed in a single, devastatingly revealing moment. The strike group didn't immediately retaliate. There were no Tomahawk missiles launched, no sudden air sorties, no dramatic turns toward the coast. Instead, the formation held, disciplined and silent, absorbing what had been revealed. The purpose was strategic patience. Every movement had been a lesson, every non-response a calculated message. The Americans could survive the chaos, observe the attackers, and extract maximum intelligence without playing into the enemy's timing. The engagement became a mirror. Iran had acted to demonstrate risk, and the United States responded by showing control. By 9:30, the strait was calm again, but the psychological pressure remained. Iran's coastal commanders were left with uncertainty. Their batteries were active but cautious, their boats alert but hesitant. The act of waiting became a trap, freezing initiative and magnifying doubt. What did the United States now know? What could it do with that knowledge? Each day that passed without retaliation became another day of leverage, as the strike group quietly reshaped the battlefield not with fire, but with presence, observation, and patient control. The 4-minute attack had ended, but its consequences would reverberate in Tehran long after the echoes of explosions faded.